The following episode may contain major spoilers for any adventure or plot details contained within the material. We strongly encourage players who are about to embark upon this adventure to stop and ask themselves if they really want to ruin the experience that their friends are crafting for them. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to another episode of Legend Lore, the podcast series where two dungeon masters flip through one tabletop RPG book at a time, giving their insights on the pros and cons of the publication in question. Hi, I'm Adam, and with me is Sean, and today we're going over our thoughts on the Chaosium product Call of Cthulhu Horror on the Orient Express. Before we get into this product, though, let me ask a couple of questions. Let's roll initiative. 18. Oh, bump me to a 15, but I'll still beat your 13.
There you go.
What do you know about this book?
I know that it is an adventure module for Call of Cthulhu.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we played a chunk of it. I'm not sure how much of a chunk of it, but that's really about it.
Very fucking little, if I can be honest. And it took us well over a year to accomplish that. I know a lot about this book. I lived and breathed it for a while. This was the first book in 6 years that I actually tried to run as a module. If you don't include the fact that I completely overhauled Death House for Curse of Strahd in D&D. So this was the first time in over 6 years that I said, hey, you know what, I'm going to run something out of a book. It was fucking difficult, I'll tell you that. I have a lot of issues and complaints about this book. And one of our patrons just bought it. So hi, Zan, I want to say Zan. I know that you just bought this. You just sent a picture to the Patreon Discord about, hey, look what I picked up. And I went, oh, you're in for a rough fucking time on that one, bud.
This one's going to hurt.
This one's going to hurt. So what do you hope to see in this book?
I hope to see very few mechanics. Because I feel as if they did a pretty good job inside the Keeper's rulebook for that one.
Yep.
I hope to see maps, and I hope to see good storylines and wonderful places to play.
Yes. I was hoping to see information about the setting because this is counter to what most Call of Cthulhu adventures are. This does not take place in New England. Mm-hmm. It takes place it starts in England. And there's a lot of interesting pieces of lore in it across Europe as well. It takes place, I believe, in 1923. You kick off and you board the Orient Express, which is a real train, right? This is a take on Murder on the Orient Express. That's what the title is a take on. Mm-hmm. But what I hope to see here was one large storyline that got us from point A to point B. Do you have any concerns about what might be in this book?
Oh, if it's anything like the Investigator's Handbook, it's going to be just a mishmash of all sorts of different sources and awful.
It's more streamlined than that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You know how the Investigator's Handbook tended to ramble on shit you didn't necessarily need?
Sure.
It hyper-focused on a lot of 1920s details and history of timelines for 100 and some odd fucking years, and it was just a lot to it.
Yep.
This one does it about trains, because you're on a train and you need to know the details of it, but fuck is there a lot of information in here. It's not quite as disjointed, but it is rambly at the beginning, and I gotta say, trying to run this myself after dealing with, because I never ran the 5th edition books, but I pulled them apart and I homebrewed them and I stole bits and pieces and I Frankensteined my own homebrew campaign out of aspects of them, and I'm very familiar with how those adventures are written. This is written in a bit of a different design language, and it is not going to hold your hand. You are expected to do the heavy lifting. It will tell you what the plot point is and not how to get there. So it's very interesting. Let's talk about it. This is going to be one part review of the Horror on the Orient Express, but mostly it's going to be kind of my experience on trying to run this shit. But let's dig into the book at first, okay?
Sure.
So normally we roll dice on this, but I've been through it so much. Why don't you walk us through the first little bit?
Yeah, I'll take the helm on this one. This thing is a tome. It's huge.
It's a fucking monster. And that's volume 1. There are 2 volumes in this. It is fucking dense.
Yeah. It's got that art style. It's got a very cool image of a train on the front of it, but it's like a demon train screaming out of hell. Feels very Meatloaf Bat Out of Hell kind of style.
Yeah, the other cover though is far more Cthulhu, but still a demonic train looking thing, right? So.
Very, very interesting. So we're looking at Horror on the Orient Express, Volume 1, London to the Alps. I'm assuming the second one will take us further than that.
Yes, the second one is Italy to Constantinople, and we're heading to Constantinople.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Not Istanbul.
I've actually heard it pronounced both ways, but Constantinople's correct.
Okay. It's nobody's business but the Turks.
You'll notice immediately the quality of the pages.
Yeah, so upon opening it, like, there's no color on the inside of the book. It's all black and white, which isn't really that big of an issue, but I suspect that it's going to make it far more difficult to understand, like, who's this picture? I'm assuming Lynn Willis, but the details are kind of lost without the color on it.
Yep, I couldn't tell you.
Credits page is much larger than it is in either of the previous books. Lots of playtesters from 2013, and like I thought, it looks like this is going to be a mismatch of mismatch.
What are you trying to say? Mismatch.
No, mismatch, like
Mixmatch?
mishmash.
Mixy-matchy?
Mushy mushy?
Mushy mushy.
Mushy mushy. Yeah, this has got playtesters from 91, keepers from 2013, scenario plus playtesters from 2013. It looks like it's going to be an amalgamation. There we go. Of multiple eras of the story. And right into the table of contents. So we have 16 chapters, including the index. Starting with the introduction, going right into a chapter detailing the Orient Express itself, as well as a chapter on how it operates, and a chapter on the campaign by itself, and then it looks like they are story chapters. So we've got Dancers in an Evening Fog, The Doom Train, The Blood Red Fez, and similarly,
we got up to Le Fleur de Mal.
Yep.
So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 into the 19 chapters.
Jeez Louise, man.
So we got about halfway through, a little bit less of book 1.
Mm-hmm.
Here, let me talk to you a little bit about what's actually in the first couple chapters.
Yeah, give her.
So when you flip it open, yeah, like I say, the other ones are like the high gloss, not high gloss, but they're the glossy pages and print and whatnot in the other books that we've talked about already in this like Cthulhu series. However, this is just almost feels like high quality computer paper.
Mm-hmm.
That has been printed, but it is absolutely dense. It's almost 400 pages, and there's 2 of them. So this was very, very expensive. I want to tell you right now, Dave went out on a limb. He said, which one do we want to play? And it was between this and one of the other ones. And we decided on this because, it gives us a bit of a tour. And he said, okay, that's really cool. I'm going to pitch in. Everybody else throw money at me because it's going to be like $40 a piece for just these books. It's going to be $200 for the whole thing. And when everyone said, sure, okay. And then I gave him $100 and no one else gave him a damn cent. And there were 7 people coming to the table by the time that you joined mid-campaign, and so that had already long passed. So don't feel any guilt on that. But Dave was pretty butthurt that he bought all of the Call of Cthulhu books, and he and I ended up splitting it together. And he put a lot of time and effort into it. Before I go into it, there are a bunch of handouts that came with it as well, and that he printed off on high quality cardstock paper, their color, and he went and got a laminated book, a little handbook built on all of the things that you're going to need to know if you're on the Orient Express. And we're going to get into it here in a second. But he also went and made sure that all of the maps that we had across Europe, and there's a different map. There's a map of Europe, and then there's a different map of the different cities every time we enter a new city as we're going across Europe. There are, I think, a dozen or more maps on this.
Wild.
And we went all in to play this just to have it fucking fizzle. This was a bad experience for the pocketbook. But let's get into it ourselves, because this is a fucking undertaking, and anybody that's going to start this off needs to understand this is an undertaking. When you ask, what am I playing, or how much time should it take to play this, it is up to 19 chapters, but you don't have to play them all. So, first and foremost, the introduction is essentially what you expect for a page, or this is what we're dealing with here. The thanks that Chaosium gives, and then what is this campaign, and it breaks it out into the fact that there's book 1 and book 2, which are the adventures. Book 3 are the handouts for the investigators, which we got. The Traveler's Companion, which is a 48-page player's guide full of useful travel information. And then 1 puzzle cut actual Sedefkar Simulacrum, which is the MacGuffin that we're looking for.
Okay.
And then 1 giant color Orient Express route map poster. So we bought this as the package off of the Chaosium website. And I have to say, the pages on this, I say like, oh, it's just computer paper. It's black and white. It looks like it could be better for all of the handouts and everything else that come with it. Fucking great.
Yeah.
At like this product and the way that it is presented, if they had gone the price like for the printing of it on the higher quality pages, this would have been extra $100. I'm glad they did it this way. So I am quite happy with this. It's not a criticism. You wanted maps? You get maps. So the first map that we get is the exact same one that is the big blow up that I've got on my wall right now. Book 1 is the Orient Express. The name Orient Express has become a byword for luxury and travel, yet before its inception in the late 19th century, luxury was not a word that leapt to the tongues of European train travelers. This is a fucking textbook, and it tells it like it's a story. It is just one ongoing story with real life photographs of people that are actual characters within the game. So they got portraits of real people from the 20s and gave them fake names and dropped them into this book as NPCs. Look, I'm sure it was up to them to grab the copyrights or to find public domains or historical whatever. But there it is. The artwork itself is black and white, but I can tell that they knew that going into it because the line drawings here are very good, right? So it doesn't feel like, oh, this is a black and white version of a color picture by any means. Mm-hmm. We do have to suffer through about 4 pages of just kind of description of life on the Orient Express and the history of train travel through Europe before we get society on the Simplon Orient Express. Simplon Orient is the actual name of it. Okay. Of the actual route that you're on. Then information in the 1890s, which is when it was created, and then the Orient today, which is today in this world. You start off in 1923. Yeah. Non-fiction books, Chaosium fiction and film references all get a section in here. And then resources for the keeper, which is the Orient Express operations. Who is the staff? And then it lists it all out. But it's 1 paragraph apiece. You don't get names, you just get roles. Do it yourself for the NPCs.
Interesting.
Considerations, other Orient Expresses, because there's more than just one. If you look at the map, you will see that there are 4. And they actually connect in different points throughout Europe. So, components of a train. Security, sleeping cars, dining cars, and we're really getting into it. Salon cars, baggage car, engine car, communications, the arrangement of the cars, ticket prices. It's getting deep into it, right? Like this is the fucking lore. We're going hard at it. Emergency equipment, stops along the way, and it actually breaks down in a simple list where you're going in what order. And then there's a nice spread here. You'll see that there's a screwdriver and a wrench for scale on this, and these look like actual drawings and that you would have had in 1920 of the different aspects of the train, like different cars, right, that are listed out. This is not a map that you can hand out to your players because
not at all.
Like this is just an idea of these are what the cars are. This is some sort of promotional material. You look at all the drawings about steam pressure gauges, the vacuum gauge, gauge or gauge.
It's gauge.
I know it is.
You'll get there, bud.
The steam dome, the boiler legging, the steam header, the chimney. Did we ever go to the fucking engine?
No.
But my God, do we get fucking information about it? Now, you might have in future chapters. We might not have gotten there. But all this information, what it's like to travel armed, the idea of different legal matters as you enter different countries. Customs was a fucking thing in this game, right? Mm-hmm. Police officers and customs agents, further reading that you can do, air travel in Europe in the 1920s, because when you get off the train to do shit, you might miss it. So jump onto a plane to catch it at the next location.
Interesting. Okay.
That's one of the things that they did here. I fucking hated that, and I said, nope, you guys are going to get your own private car, and if you don't get back in time, they will disconnect it, and you will catch the next train 5 days from now and reconnect your private car. I just gave you guys a wealthy benefactor, so you have private cars. You had 2 of them. Because I'm not tracking the timeline on this, because the timeline fucking matters. So, we get a map of air routes in Europe in 1923. breakdown of air taxis, common commercial passenger aircraft, and finally we get into there's a section here, scenario options. If you railroad it, if you've got optional scenarios, and if you completely get derailed. But this is just a sidebar. They expect you will be, because players going to play, right? The campaign is the orientation here. It talks about the scenario timelines and the calendar, the scenarios, what to do and how long each one of these things should take, where you're going, when, whether or not it is a core adventure or it's optional. Of the 19, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of the 19 are actually part of the campaign. I have fucking thoughts. So, there's so much information about all of this. We get into, finally, the Sedefkar scrolls. This is in this section here. This is the most important information that you're going to need for the entire campaign, as well as Fenalik, who was a leper monk who is now a fucking vampire and chases the party through the entire campaign. You guys unlocked him at the very last thing that you did, because you guys went into a sanitarium. And he was in there fucking waiting for you. And when you escaped, he escaped. And he is supposed to clean up all the messes you leave behind as he tracks you and hunts you through the rest of the campaign, only to be a not villain at the end. The cult deals with him, you don't.
Interesting.
Fucking wild that this was added, and he's supposed to, like, he is a problem. He is going to drain the NPCs. He could eat a couple of investigators if they look too deeply into it, right? But he follows you, right?
If they get too invested in the storyline?
Yes. Fuck. We're just in for another episode of this, aren't we? Then we get into the Selim Makriot, which is not the actual bad guy. That's his father. Mehmet Makriot is the actual bad guy for a while. And then another section called Fenalik again, because he comes back, right? The investigators. We get into Sedefkar's legacies, which is all about this simulacrum. Do you see the pictures they have here? Behind the seemingly peaceful and pleasant dervish Turkish community is hiding the most heinous cult that mankind has ever known, the Brothers of the Skin. And they've got a real picture of Turkish monks in some sort of bizarre orientation, like they're clearly in the middle of something.
Dervish is a type of dancing. Whirling dervishes?
Yeah.
That's what they are. They spin. That's what they're doing.
With their hands up and their heads to the side. Like, they look almost crucified in this picture. Right? Like taking that pose. It's interesting. It's cool that they've grabbed this picture, but it's telling a different story. Like, these are supposed to be crazy ass monks, right? You start to get into the Sedefkar scrolls, and then kind of the ideas about running the campaign itself. There's a location of the scrolls, and each one of the scrolls leads you to the locations of the segments of the Sedefkar simulacrum, which is a life-size fucking statue that you piece together one limb and torso piece at a time, and you have to take it on the train with you. As you build it, it gets more evil and fucks you up harder.
Interesting.
Yes.
That was the arm that we collected.
You guys got the arm, yeah.
Yes.
So, there's a bunch of information about incidents aboard the Orient Express, different train cars, the investigator survival guide. I'll get there eventually, man. It's fucking 1 a.m. We reward ingenuity. We modify difficulty. We plan for success. And so the Days Ex Fenalik.
Okay.
Right? But also, there's this giant page and a half sidebar, a continent of horror, and what you can expect in the Call of Cthulhu setting in Albania, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and so on and so forth. And it's not just a page and a half. It goes and goes and goes and goes and goes, and there's so fucking much of it. Celluloid train terrors. This starts to get into Terror Train, the Hunchback of Notre Dame. If you want to see train horror in the 20s, look up these old black and white movies, is what this sidebar says, and takes up 2 fucking pages in the middle of telling me how to run this campaign. News aboard the Orient Express. There is a timeline, and each day that goes by, not every day, but every once in a while, you end up with this headline. What are the details of that news clipping? Make it up yourself, fuck you. And that is what we get before we jump into the first
chapter.
The first chapter.
Yeah.
How much of that was super fucking helpful for running a campaign? Some of it for sure, but a lot of it was just wild fucking filler. And when I had to go back and figure out the details of Mehmet Makriot, for example, or Fenalik, where am I looking in this book for it? There I'm not kidding when I say that I was flipping back and forth through chapters just for the details that I needed to find out what the timeline was. None of this was straightforward. At no point in the rest of this book are we going to see, that timeline with all the headlines? It doesn't tell you where you're going to be in which section when and when they're going to run into these headlines. These are just some details in the background.
Jeez Louise.
Dancers in an evening fog starts off with an auction. You're all summoned by Professor Smith. I feel like they could have done better with that. But you're summoned to London. He's got a manservant named Beddoes. He's the faithful butler, and he lives in his massive estate. These are all real pictures of real things. Sorry. And then here, dotted as if I'm going to cut this out and hand it to my players, as if there isn't useful shit on the other side of the page, is what you know about your friend, Professor Smith. And I'm supposed to hand this out to them. This is a constant theme all the way through this book. Mm-hmm. These fucking handouts. Now, because we bought the deluxe version, we actually have those handouts in other places. But if you just buy the books, you're going to have to photocopy this.
Wild.
Yeah. It is very, very helpful to also get the digital version. So I'll point that out now.
Is that an artifact of when the 1991 edition of this came out?
Let me tell you something. I was going to save this until later. This is an update of that. It is a direct update to it. And as time goes on, the history of this adventure is the core adventure, those 11 bits and pieces, that was the only thing that was published in 1991. Mm-hmm. Every time they republish it, they add 1, 2, 3 more adventures to go in between.
Okay.
I have an inherent issue with this. First of all, the tone changes drastically between the adventures. Some of them are flashbacks, out of the blue, just flashbacks. And then, on top of that, you have the fact that you are pulling your characters and your players off of the main storyline to do side quests for almost half of this adventure. When I say these things are optional, honestly weigh them, because it will disrupt the pacing and flow and will take you off of the story of getting the Sedefkar simulacrum. We had a lot of trouble figuring out what we were even supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, because we got so caught up in what Professor Smith was up to, because there was a lot of details in there, that we ended up getting pulled off focus, and we didn't realize that, we're supposed to be going after this thing and getting on an Orient Express. I just started coming up with all sorts of details. All right, let me go through this. First of all, there's breakdown. The Challenger lecture. This is a real lecture that actually happened. There are real celebrities that were at this lecture. Mm-hmm. So, and it talks about he's a part of a organization, but this had Count von Zeppelin, Marconi, Madame Curie, Edison. These are people that went to different lectures like this in this series of annual lectures. These are real people, and we've inserted ourselves in the 1922. This happens right before Christmas. One of the things about him, and you'll see we get the scenario timeline here, day 1 through day 7. It's supposed to take 7 days. Day 1 is Monday, January 1st. Mm-hmm. So you get called in to meet him just before, and his lecture is on New Year's Day. So everybody has to show up, and you get a chance to experience London at Christmas in 1923. None of that is involved in the fucking book. It is very little bits and pieces here and there of what to even fucking do in London. Everything that we ended up doing was my research off the fucking internet to figure out, was electricity a fucking thing in all of London in 1923? And if not, what? Because it was during the transitional period in major cities, and in rural areas, it was still arc lights for lampposts.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah, and in your home, you were still lantern and candlelight. So, when you get into it, there's a bunch of events of what happens in London. On Sunday, January 7th, the National Unemployed Workers Committee movement stages a demonstration demanding the Parliament address the unemployment issue. January 7th, you're on the fucking train and you're getting the fuck out of here. Why did I get a quarter page on this? And there's a lot of it. When I say in the previous books, labor of love, this was a madman's obsession putting this shit together. And you can feel it. This is the beginning. The idea here is that, you do get maps and there are newspapers and whatnot. Our good friend, Professor Smith, ends up getting horribly murdered. He gets burned, and Beddoes is the one to take your or to kind of push you forward with, hey, this is what he wanted. There was an attempted murder on his life. It's somehow related to the Sedefkar simulacrum and Macreate, Mehmet Macreate. So, and then Professor Smith fucking dies. And then you get into a bunch of what does Beto knows, or what Beto's knows, what happens after you meet with them, when Smith finally gasps his last gasp. And after all of that, you get investigating the professor at the different places that he might have been, or if you want to go to the Oriental Club. And remember, we went to the Oriental Club. We spent an entire session there. There were a bunch of NPCs. There was an investigator that you guys ended up murdering that was there. And like, there was a bunch of shit that went on. Sean, it is a paragraph and a sentence. That entire session, as well as about half of the lead up to it, was me really doing the heavy lifting and building this library.
Yeah.
Right. There's details about multiple murders that are going on, and you can go to the Chelsea Arms or Scotland Yard, but there's no fucking reason for your investigators to go to Scotland Yard.
At least not detailed in the book.
No. The big assumption that this book makes that is not really laid out in the other two books, the Investigator Handbook or the Keeper Rulebook, is the attitude of investigators. That investigator clubs were a thing back in the 1920s. Sherlock Holmes was not on the fucking government payroll. He was a private citizen who was just brilliant and got invested in these specific murders and mysteries and whatnot. That's what you're supposed to be doing. We are an investigators club. We are working parallel to the police or whoever else as we put the clues together to solve the mystery, right? Is there any reason for you to go to the Embassy of Turkey?
I mean, no.
I got 3 more paragraphs about that. So one of the pieces of information in this chapter is the fact that everybody here knows Professor Smith. We saw that actually in a previous chapter. But one of the pieces of information here is that Professor Smith's wife died under mysterious circumstances. What you didn't see was I took that and I said, all right, we're going to flash back a number of years. And this is where the players were all summoned on Christmas Day. Sorry, was it 1893? No, I think it was I did a 10-year jump. So it was 1912. And the players were all summoned before World War I. So that automatically gave them a minimum age they could be when it was in the campaign itself. They were summoned to dinner for Christmas because Professor Smith had lived this great, varied, wild life touring the entire globe, doing great adventures and meeting all of these people, and then he got married. And his wife wanted to meet all of his best friends. And while they all showed up, there was one NPC that also showed up with them. And then halfway through dinner, he pulled a gun, tried to shoot Professor Smith and missed, and murdered his wife instead. And Professor Smith has been in no contact with anybody else for all of this time, because the detail dropped here is, ever since his wife's death, he has been looking into the occult. That's what you fucking get. That's all you get in this. That is the main motivating factor of your quest giver, who then immediately fucking dies.
Interesting.
Yeah, but here's the other thing. There's a very small note here as well that says, and it's a big plot point, and so spoiler alert because you guys didn't know this, Beddoes is the one that's going to keep giving you guys information, and he's going to be running the deal, the entire show after Professor Smith dies. Meanwhile, there are a bunch of other murders and stuff happening around the city, and you guys end up going for some reason to Macreate's shop. We don't know anything about him, but for some reason we're going there. And when we get there, it's closed and he's not there. That's what you get. That's like, there's little bits and pieces trying to build this overarching story here. What you don't realize is that Beddoes has also been murdered, and he's been replaced by one of the Brothers of Skin, and they're called the Brothers of Skin because they can slough off their skin and through a ritual, take the place of somebody else.
Interesting. Okay.
So you get the idea that Mehmet Macreate has been seen in multiple places throughout the city, sometimes even at the same time. And so there's this idea here that the Brothers of Skin are doing a bunch of nefarious shit in the background. But your players never learn the name Brothers of Skin this early. And Beddoes continues to be an investigator, or a helper to the investigators on their travels by sending letters and telegrams and all this stuff. But he's actually working for the bad guys. And as far as I could tell, that never got resolved. Like, he just does that now to keep tabs on where you guys are.
So it's it's leaving a lot of room for the players to fuck things up for you.
Right.
And it's leaving very little details as to how to actually steer the players, how to railroad them effectively.
Yeah, and that's the damn problem here as well with this campaign, is that you have to stay on this literal railroad. If you get too distracted, you're gonna fuck up. And my way around it was just Professor Smith is super fucking rich, and there's gonna be just a wad of money for you guys, as well as his private cars that will be attached to the Orient Express.
Yeah.
So we do get little bits and pieces of really cool evocative stuff. For example, on the second or third day, the investigators notice a scholar slumped over his books, hat still rudely on his head, apparently dozing. They're in the reading room, but outside the skies are pouring and most scholars have remained at home. At some time during the investigator's day, this is in the library, the fellow slowly tumbles off his chair and lays unmoving on the floor. Beneath the hat, beneath the overcoat, beneath the shoes and socks is a skinned corpse costing 1 or 1d6 sanity points, that's success or failure, to view. Immediate identification is impossible to make. Attached to the corpse is a note written in modern Turkish. Nobody took Turkish, by the way.
Why would we have? We had no information that would tell us to.
Now, the note says, the skinless one will not be denied. That's a really cool thing to bring us forward. But we then end up in the next segment, which is all about the Doom Train, which you may not even have to do. It's one of the optional ones. Now, at the end of this chapter, you get a word for the keeper, which is like 2 paragraphs of keep this shit in mind, and then a breakdown of who your people are, including Dr. Julius Smith, Mehmet Makriot, James Beddoes, and a fire vampire?
That we never met?
No, because it would goddamn kill you. Its movement was way faster than the rest of you. Its fighting is 85%, and its damage is 2d6 burns plus magic point drain.
Yeah, it would massacre us.
Yeah, absolutely massacred. And it had armor. There's also information about the new spell, Control Skin. So you get a very crude breakdown of the British Museum.
Because we need that.
Well, that was one of the places where you can go to look up clues and hints about stuff. Because you're looking for this Sedefkar simulacrum, but you're still not entirely certain why. At this point, upon reading this, I said, okay, I've done this little prologue, and then I got them used to the idea of 5 of them fighting just a dude with a gun. And then I made the guy Mehmet Makriot. So when they killed him, and then he pops up later looking healthy, there's a mystery here. I needed a plot hook. I needed to acknowledge the fact that Professor Smith and Beddoes were up to shit. They were looking into the occult. There's a bunch of things going on. It says at the beginning that his big lecture that he gives, Professor Smith gives, that the reason why he brings everybody back is because he has found proof of life after death, and that's the purpose of his lecture. And then he, in private, brings everybody else over, like all of his friends, and says, now that you've seen my lecture, what do you think? I'm looking for more clues. I need to find my wife. Then he fucking burns to death. So I added a whole bunch of shit about him contacting the other side, and there were they did a bunch of like pencil rubbings on a pad of paper, and after he died, and found the name or the words Sedefkar Simulacrum, and like okay, there's a mystery. I had to drop the hints and clues into this to be able to put it all together. He had sent them on a couple of quests to go talk to different people. None of this is in the module. When I say it took us a year and a half to go 4 modules in, it fucking took us a year and a half. Now, I really like the Doom Train. It's a lot of fun. It's also completely fucking unnecessary, and you should really do it before Chapter 1 kicks off, because trying to jam this in between January 1st and January 7th is insane, and you don't know you need to do that until you get to Chapter 2.
And this is one of the ones that they injected after.
This is one of the optional ones, right? The next one after that, and this one was really cool, and we had ghosts walking the streets and a ghost train that only the investigators could see, and I added a lot of this. At one point, the ghosts were following the investigators, but they figured out the chase mechanics worked in their favor. So 2 of them hid. They watched one of their NPCs get pulled up onto the Doom Train, and then 2 of them hid in the bushes for all the ghosts to chase the other 2 as they literally ran around the block, shooting at the ghosts behind them as on Christmas fucking Day.
Jesus. Yeah.
Because I ran this as a prequel so that we could actually play it. So I had the Beddoes, or Professor Smith's wife gets murdered, then there's the Doom Train next, and then there's the first adventure. You see the amount of legwork I'm doing at the fucking beginning? Just to, when we wrap the whole thing up, like they get on the Doom Train, there's a whole bunch of like, they're getting pulled on by the ghosts, and they've got to fight back. Really tense moments, and the train leaves again. They find the whole mystery of how to summon the train, and so on and so forth. There was a lot of rolls. It was really cool. Probably one of the highlights of the campaign we rolled. But it then goes directly into the Blood Red Fez, which takes place in 1893 and is completely optional and is about a hat that eats your brains. Now, it's a little bit more intense than that. There is evil and your force of will against the hat's force of will. And then you find out that it's not the only blood red fez. But I had to stop my whole campaign and say, okay, so, dear players, a fez, which we think of now as just being a cute little, like...
Shriners?
A Shriner's cap. Used to be just a part of, like, overnight headwear that people would wear with their, like, smoking pajamas. Most men owned one, and it was a novelty from distant lands. And, like, it's weirdly steeped in racism and cultural appropriation, but is also more commonplace than we realize. And it is a silly fucking hat in 2022 when we were playing this, right? There's no fucking purpose for it. But we had to derail the campaign. Everybody get different characters to play. And because Professor Smith is still alive, so I have to keep him alive in this. And now we're also going to learn that Mehmet Makried is a part of this. And so I had to go into this. We're in so many different handouts that we've gone through at this point. So many different disjointed, disconnected storylines, right? The prologue with the wife, the Doom Train, which is all about a toy train, and you need your guys to get inducted into a train spotter organization in order to get the information needed about a guy who some sort of murderer, and then the murderer's son looking for his father who was caught on the Doom Train. There's so much fucking shit, and none of it has to do with the Sedefkar Simulacrum. By the time that I'm done Chapter 3, the Sedefkar Simulacrum has been 10% of the story so far. Mm-hmm. And it is the main goal of this story. And it doesn't get any better. Chapter 4 gets us into France, right? Hold on, Chapter 4 gets us into France. Mm-hmm. And you pretty much start off with going to the National Library. And while you do spend a little bit of time in Paris, it's not about Paris. It's about going to the small town outside of Paris called Poissy, where you have to go talk to a doctor who has nothing to do with any of this. And I've got a table full of 7 fucking idiots going, haha, Poissy. Mm-hmm. My God. And you were here for all of this insanity, right?
A part of it.
And we finally had to get into the underground sunken foundation of a previously built castle underneath a doctor's house, right? To then dig through underground tunnels to find this one artifact which was corrupting the area around it and causing bad luck for the people. Meanwhile, what the fuck are you guys doing with your fucking hats, right? Mm-hmm. We skipped the Dreamlands Express and we started to get into Nocturne, and that was the next, the second last one. I skipped the Dreamland Express because I wanted to do it later in the campaign, because it is literally everybody falls asleep and goes on a sleep adventure on the sleep version of the Orient Express. It's another one that was just injected.
Jeez Louise.
Instead, we started to get more invested in the NPCs on the train. We got back to the train and I started to kind of deal with who are the other passengers and what are they up to. And incidentally, they all have like a rich history of, there's this count and his bodyguard and the countess who's sleeping with the bodyguard and her handmaiden who's depressed for this reason. And there's all of these NPCs that have been added to it and have absolutely no bearing on the rest of the goddamn campaign.
So I'm getting the feeling that this is more a collection of plot hooks that people thought would be cool with a very loose narrative thread of, oh, by the way, there's trains involved somehow.
Yes. I want you to know that when you're in Paris, before you go to Poissy to actually deal with the Sedefkar Simulacrum, hold on. You know what? I'm just going to show you this because you're going to be fucking shocked. I know you were around for this stuff. I am into Paris now. Day 1, days 2 and 3, day 4 and 5, and we get to this. Finally, we looked into who Comte Fenelic is, right? And it was his villa that was torn down, and that was the underground. And he was this debaucherous. He was a vampire at this point, but we were trying to figure out who he is, where he lived. So we're going different places. And one of the places we go is the Charenton Asylum.
Yep.
Dan went off with one of our NPC researchers, who was also a protester, and ended up in the catacombs beneath Paris, dealing with the ghoul that was Guillaume. That never went fucking anywhere because Dan stopped coming. At the Charenton Asylum, I want you to see there's a little bit of information on page 151, and then all of this information, the journal of Dr. Delplace, right, all the way up to Poissy. We get about three and a half pages of it. Commitment should not prove a difficult task for seasoned investigators. A referral from a doctor will grant individuals voluntary entrance and observation. But in order to get this, the investigator must suffer a genuine mental affliction or convince them with a successful fast talk or acting role. I want you to know this is not a mandatory part of the campaign. We spent 3 sessions on it as everyone got committed. And then some people got too committed. And then we had to form an escape and a breakout. And Fenelek had to chase us out of there. And he followed us through the basement. It was a whole fucking big deal off of 3 pages of some general notes about what the doctor might goddamn know. I had to design an entire sanatorium. That was hours of internet research on this. Mm-hmm. When I'm a little bitter about the fact that this campaign fizzled, I'm a lot bitter about it because the money and the effort that went into it pissed me off.
Yeah.
So, Zan, as you're listening to this, I know you have put the money and a lot of the effort into it. I'm telling you now, there are 3 things that you should know before, and this is kind of where I'm going to wrap this up, because the only thing that we have left is more fucking campaign.
Yeah.
Over and over and over.
More of the same of what you've been talking about for the last 45 minutes.
Yes, and I'm sorry that we didn't really go through this book. The campaign details themselves are scattered. You get kind of the locations that you can go and what information you can get there, and that's it. You might get an NPC breakdown, but these NPCs will not be joining you because you're getting back on the train. Mm-hmm. As we're going through this, and we get to this chart that's on page 37 about core and optional adventures. I want you to see it goes core, optional, core, optional, then 3 core. And that brings us to the end of book 1. The rest of it is all in book 2. Mm-hmm. But there are 3 optional adventures in a row before 5 core. And then the last 2 are optional as well. One of them takes place in Istanbul today. You jump 100 years in the future. So Zan, my 3 comments to you are: 1, do not let it be beer and pretzels. Maintain a serious tone. If you end up with a series of chuckle fucks blowing off steam at the end of this campaign, or at the end of every session, it will be disjointed. 2, measure closely and carefully if you want to include the optional adventures, because they will pull focus and they will make this campaign feel very, very, very long. And my 3rd note is read ahead by about 5 core chapters, and then take all of the clues they should learn in that one and sprinkle them in the chapters leading up to it, because that is the only way to have any sort of coherency for the horror on the Orient Express. The details here are neat. They're cool, especially if you got the handouts. If you didn't get the handouts, I think you can just buy them separately on Chaosium. I don't remember, but I think you can. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's available on Drive-Thru RPG or DM's Guild or wherever, but I'm pretty sure it's available online. There are some YouTube videos that I remember seeing of people playing through this, but they were all clearly seasoned players, and even they were struggling to keep track of what they're supposed to be paying attention to, because every new chapter is a new mystery, and some of those mysteries contribute to the overall mystery, but not to the other.
And some of them happen before other mysteries have even taken place.
Yes.
So any of the previous knowledge that your players have had, mm-hmm. right, to get them there is now meta knowledge.
Yes.
It's frustrating as a player and a keeper, man.
I do not blame my players for losing track of the plot. Yeah. It was wildly difficult to maintain at the best of times, and I was putting in all sorts of information about the Brothers of Skin, Mehmet Makriot, and the Order of whatever it is, I forget what it is now, the final cult problem that's in Constantinople, right? The idea here is at some point you have to get the Sedefkar Simulacrum to the place in Constantinople to destroy it. It can only be destroyed in this one place. The investigators don't know that, but they learn that slowly as they go. This gigantic statue that you're building, piece by piece, is corrupting the players the entire time. And the place to destroy it is in the fucking headquarters of the enemy cult. Which means, if they steal the pieces from you, which they will try to do, you just get to the end anyway. It goes where you're going. Now, It's been a while since I've read the last couple of chapters in book 2, but I highly recommend doing that and understanding what's at stake, figuring out how to use phenolic appropriately.
So, sorry, I don't want to interrupt. If the players play the cards very fucking wrong, the entire thing is a gigantic rug pull.
It's not a rug pull. It's railroaded anyway. You if you want to chase them there, they're going to the same place you were fucking going.
Wild.
So, the horror on the Orient Express is considered one of the top 3 best legacy massive campaigns for Call of Cthulhu. The last thing that I want to bring up is there are some parts in this where I looked at the math and the mechanic and I realized that that's not a thing in 7th edition. This is a holdover from a previous edition the editors didn't catch.
So even with the full 2 pages of credits on here, there were gigantic errors in it.
Not gigantic. They're minor things, but it is stuff that makes me realize this is not, it's not the high quality product that the fucking price tag gave us. The handouts are beautiful. I love the fucking maps. The book themselves, the art, the details, the amount of love that went into both the Orient Express and the cities in these different timelines. The fact that we're dealing with real locations and real organizations, and sometimes real people are even mentioned in the different cities we're going to. It's a very lived-in world. The world building is great.
Yeah.
This will not be easy to run as a keeper. You have to know what you're talking about. This might be one of the most challenging things that I have ever read, especially considering that a lot of my players were new to this system. Mm-hmm. So not only were they trying to figure out which mysteries are important, what clues are important to those mysteries, and what can they do, they didn't understand what an investigator is supposed to do, how they're supposed to react and interact with the world as an investigator, and they didn't understand some of the basic mechanics. If you're going to play horror on the Orient Express, it is not for beginners. We made that mistake. Additionally, on top of that, it is not meant for a casual game night.
No.
This is meant for people that are trying to get to the end of this story. And it is so disjointed, it feels strangely realistic. Because from one place to another, sometimes you leave the NPCs behind. Sometimes you get a message, a telegram in one city. You got to wait 3 weeks to actually meet up with the person, in that city. And that feels very, very good. But if you're playing for an hour and a half with a gameplay every other Friday, you're going to lose this shit quickly.
Yeah.
Right? So make sure that the investigators are taking good fucking notes, right? As all investigators should be, but they're going to lose the fucking plot on this very easily. And you may lose the plot of it as a keeper, especially if you're balancing teaching rules and trying to learn what 1920s Eastern Europe has to offer in the wake of World War I. Mm-hmm. Because it's 1923. We're 5 years off of World War I, and we are, as far as Europe is concerned, 16 years off of World War II.
I feel as if it would be very difficult. I find it difficult myself to keep in mind the era that I'm playing in, specifically in that era.
Yes.
Because there's so much upheaval that happened in a 30-year period.
Yeah.
Right? It's having the amount of knowledge that you need to be able to have as a character in the world, the amount of contemporary knowledge that you need to be able to have for that time period, that's a huge investment.
Mm-hmm. And it is incredibly fucking difficult to keep track of that shit if it's not already on your fucking radar.
Yeah.
So a thing that I want to point out is the table of contents, there are no chapter numbers. Did you notice that?
Yeah, I noticed that, yeah.
So that's because these are not chapters of the same story. These are interconnected, smaller subplots wound together to make one overarching theme.
Yeah.
That we're dealing with, like life on a fucking train. But here's a great example of some of the editing errors that I found in this. Okay, when this was first published, it was published in 5 books. Book 1, the tome that we have now, was book 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. The volume 2 that we have now was books 3 and 4, and then the Investigator Handbook was book 5.
Okay.
There are still parts of this book that says flip forward to book 3, which is actually the first half of book 2 because they've made it a new volume. So it's that kind of shit as well, where you're sitting there trying to figure out which chapter, which story, what am I looking for? And when it says page 28 of book 3, what does that mean? Where am I going? all of this has been re-edited, right? So it's that doesn't happen often, but I caught it a couple of times.
Mhm.
So these are the problems, especially a lot of the online guides and stuff that you're trying to use as well are going to reference books 1 through 4. They're not going to be helpful. You have to go chapter title by chapter title, and remember, not all of these chapters existed in every single previous edition. It was added over time. Some of them are legacies, some of them are not. The Dreamlands in book 2 has a sequel, the Dreamlands 2, where you're back in your dream train shit with fallout from not just the previous Dreamlands, but also some shit that's happened in the real world as well. Very cool and neat idea, but it makes the first Dreamlands, which felt so disconnected from everything else. I'm like, I'm just going to run this later as one big module, like one big sidebar for us to go do for 3 months, and then we'll come back, right? And time moves differently in the Dreamlands. I got to do something different, right?
Yeah.
Because it felt, as a novel, sure. As a role-playing game, not so much.
No, that would be difficult to keep track of.
Yeah. So, let's roll dice. I have some questions, unless there's anything else that you want to dig into here.
There really isn't. There is so much in this book, and it's not necessarily that it feels... you use the word disjointed quite a bit. I don't necessarily feel that it's disjointed. I feel like there's so many ways for the players to get sidetracked. So many ways for them to...
Especially if they're coming from high adventure, high fantasy games where they're used to being absolute maniacs.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is not a time for murder hoboism.
No.
By a damn sight.
No.
And as much as we get that just by flipping through the core rule books that exist, it's even more so apparent here, right?
Yeah.
I feel like any single one of these would be a really cool, fun little mystery. I know the optional bits would have been really cool bits and pieces. But as a 19-part, in my opinion, should be like a 23-part, because you got to break it up and put it in a different order and shit. Like, you've got to figure out a way to make all of these pieces smooth. Because the other part of it, which I noticed when I was reading through book 2, is the chapter starts with you getting off the train. The chapter ends with you getting on the train. Over and over and over. And it's weirdly episodic, but still it's like episode, like Monster of the Week, that doesn't have anything to do with the overall plot.
Is the intention that you're supposed to be able to run one of the chapters a session?
Oh God, no. No. Because there's no way that you're going to go into Paris and explore Paris, do the research and find out that you're even looking for someone named Comte Fenelick.
Mm-hmm.
Then figure out that, oh, he was alive in this time. He used to have a manor that's over here. The manor burnt down. There's a house on it over there. You don't learn that until you got into the asylum and dealt with the people in the asylum, possibly getting yourself committed, but also learning that Fenelick was a member, or was a patient against his will, by the people that thought he was evil for all of his debaucherous parties. So he was committed here, and then suddenly there's no more record of him anymore. Nobody knows if he lived or died. But there's a monster hunting people at night, and sucking their souls out and draining them of their life, slowly killing them over multiple nights. And you as a party have to encounter him, and only then will you be able to get the pieces that you need to escape, to get out, assuming that you didn't just find a doctor to back you up in a city that you've never fucking been to before, right? So there are all of these bits and pieces that are moving here, and you haven't even gotten to the house, which, by the way, has a fucking doctor in it, but you don't know that you need to go to that house. So, like, there's so many people. By the way, there's a monster in the catacombs. There are riots in Paris and protests going on. The young people are up in arms about nationalism and foreign people taking their jobs. Meanwhile, electricity and modern art is being brought into... There's so fucking much. There's no way you're doing this in 2, let alone 1 session. Let's roll dice.
Sure. Womp womp.
What's your overall impression of the content?
I mean, you're right. There's a lot of it. I think that it would take a very dedicated group of players to get anywhere with it.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
Okay.
When you stop and think about the players we had at our table, there were some people that were there to blow off steam at the end of a long week.
Yeah.
I will say this outright. Kyle, 100% fucking invested.
Yes.
Every single session.
Yeah.
Everyone else had moments of fuck about.
Yep.
So, and the fact that we were playing it with a rotating group of investigators, so it's cool if you missed this week, we're going to keep playing anyway, made tracking this story very, very difficult. And I had to spend, if you remember, 20 minutes at the beginning of every session recapping.
It also made it very difficult as a player because I had no investment in the story at all.
Which means, why are you going to take it seriously?
Right?
Yeah.
So you have to have a core group of people that are going to show up.
Yeah. This will not benefit the sometimes maybe players.
Yeah.
Right. My thoughts on the content that is provided here. Each one of the chapters themselves gives you enough information that if you're an experienced keeper or dungeon master, or you're good at running a table, you can take the bits and pieces, do an hour or so of research, build a couple NPCs, and actually have a pretty decent time running this. There's a lot of opportunities to get the players in over their heads, but if they're not stupid, and you don't mind having an NPC or a newspaper clipping or something just fall in their laps every once in a while when they hit a dead end, you should be able to get through this, each one of the adventures, no problem. However, the adventures are not chapters in a story. They are all short stories. Every once in a while, you will realize this short story that we're in, out of the blue, connects to one of the previous short stories. But we don't know how, and we don't know why, and we don't know where it is in this investigation that is going to link up. So that is why I call it disjointed. Each one of the chapters themselves, and I will give this to them, each one of the chapters, excellent adventure.
As a self-contained unit.
As a self-contained unit. Doom Train, one of the highlights for me. Absolutely loved it. I could fucking get rid of the Blood Red Fez, but we remembered it. It was interesting. All that shit with Professor Smith at the beginning and Mehmet Mekriet and all that wild stuff about the Brothers of Skin, and very cool origin story, or like introduction rather, to the plot. Very neat. The thing that's different here, as opposed to Dungeons and Dragons adventures, is that there are 2 or 3 steps down the rabbit hole that you have to get to before you find the core of the mystery. For example, on the Doom Train, it starts off with someone in their boarding room, in a boarding house, goes missing. There's the sound of a train and the room is full of smoke, and there's a toy train that was there at the scene of the crime. You then have to hunt down the train, which someone had taken and sold somewhere else. You got to go find a model train collector. You need to talk your way into a fancy party to deal with them. We went through a lot of steps to then find out that this used to be owned by a man who was looking for his father, who was a bank robber who disappeared by using a ritual while on a train that everybody knows matches the description. If you're friends with the train spotting organization, then you'll realize that it's the same train that mysteriously went missing 20 years ago. And so, like, it's on and on and on, all these little steps to get to the root of the mystery, and then you yourself can summon the Doom Train and find the missing man.
How can they expect the players to be able to get all of those pieces in place like that, though?
Well, they set it up. They do set it up in an intelligent way. They say, here's the pieces of information. Here are the locations you need to go to. Here are the NPCs that have this information. Here's where you may find them. This is how you might get them on your side. And it's very much a, once I do this, I get this info, right? Once I befriend this guy, he will explain this. But it's up to you as a keeper to navigate that conversation, to understand the motivations, the wants and needs of this NPC. Otherwise, they're all just exposition dumps. There's enough information about the NPCs to make them unique and interesting and flavorful, but it is very much on the shoulders of the keeper to do that lifting, which is why these are not adventures. Like, they're not a linear path by any means. They are scenarios that you have to read 100% of. You can't just go from page 38 to page 39 to page 40. You have to do all of the reading. You have to know your material. When I say that my overall impression of this book is largely positive, I mean, I love homebrewing. This gave me some real room to stretch my legs and to play out different aspects. It also encourages me. A lot of stuff I saw online is get used to playing different accents. I'm not going to do that. Right? I will, because I'm Canadian, use French phrases in the appropriate way. But by the time that we were going to get into Switzerland, no, it's fuck that.
That's not happening.
He says in a Swiss voice, right? So, and that gets really dangerous when you start doing it with Turkish people. And now you're doing, racist impressions of people, right? So, my overall impression of this content is actually surprisingly relatively it's good. I've spent a lot of time bitching about how hard it is, but it's because they tried to link a bunch of unconnected shit together. Each one of the pieces is great, though. It's hard, but it's worth it. We had a bad group for it.
Yeah.
And I started off this episode by talking about how Dave didn't get paid for it as kind of an indication, not to say everybody else is a cheap bastard. No. This was a level of commitment that nobody else was on.
Mhm.
Right? So, how do you feel about the artwork in it?
In it, I mean, there was lots of it. There was plenty of line art. It wasn't to the same quality as the other books, but to your point, it's also 2 books, and had they included a bunch of color art in it, it would have ballooned the price way beyond budget.
Yeah. Also, they seem to have given up all of the really, really great artwork to use history accurate, period accurate photographs and actual pictures of handouts and things that would have been given at the I don't fucking hate that. That was an interesting different choice to do, and none of what we looked at felt like this should have been in color.
Yeah.
Because even the photographs were in black and white when they would have been in black and white. So
yeah.
So I don't hate it. What grade do you give it?
It was a very confusing mess to look at. I'm probably going to give it about a C. Because I agree. There's a lot of stuff in there that you can chew on, and I think this would be fantastic to use as inspiration for your own campaign, whether it's in Call of Cthulhu or using it as inspiration elsewhere.
Yeah.
As it's laid out right now, I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't approach it. I just wouldn't. Like, at this point, I've heard more horror stories about this than good stories about this.
Let me ask you a question. Did you have fun playing it?
I had fun playing. I did, but I also had difficulties with having investment from my character.
If you can separate the difference between having fun around the table with your friends and having fun with this specific adventure, was the fun you were having more about the people around the table, or was it more about the adventure?
I'll be honest, it was about the people.
I think that with this specific group, it very much was the people around the table. I know specifically that James and Jed and Terry and Dave and Dan, when he was showing up, they were all very much there for the good times. Because we were meeting on Friday nights at like 8 o'clock at night. People had 2 hours to hang out and drink beer and shoot the shit with their friends.
And from my point of view, it was the first time in a long time that I even role-played with these people.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's true.
And some of them the first time I had.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting experience. I'm not going to say I don't want to do it again.
No, and as a matter of fact, now that we've gone through this, I'm looking at it going, we never got to do that thing I wanted to do. I want to do this now. Okay, so you gave it a C. If I'm going to be perfectly honest, I'm going to give this book a B, because the pieces there themselves are fine. It was the overall bringing it together, the handful of editing mistakes in it, but it's famous for a reason. It's just dense. It's hard to navigate. But like I said with the other 2 Call of Cthulhu books, this seems to be a Chaosium issue now, right? Like, it's not the content, it's the interface, right? And that's the problem. So that's a B, because I think the content is fucking rad. The scary demonic train full of evil going across Europe is fucking rad. That's super neat. So when should someone add this publication to the library?
After they have had a couple of sessions without it. I think that they need to run a couple of encounters, maybe smaller module, like one of the ones that's included in the back of the Keeper's Rulebook, to be able to understand the narrative flow of the modules, perhaps.
Yeah, again, the one that came with the DM screen as well, if you go out and buy the official, like, Chaosium, the Call of Cthulhu DM screen, comes with a small adventure. Yeah. And it is small. I think it's smaller than the other ones. And I flipped through it. I haven't run it, but it looks very solid.
Yeah.
So, when do you add this? Play Call of Cthulhu for a year.
You think a full year?
A full fucking year. That is assuming that you're getting to play 2 to 3 hours every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Right? So that's, 72 hours of gameplay? 78, 76, somewhere around there. It doesn't matter. Like, you need dozens of hours of gameplay before you bite this one off, because it's way more than you can chew. Mm-hmm. Get very, very good with the mechanics. Make sure your players are good with the mechanics. And make sure that they understand the tone of what a fucking investigator should be doing. And they are not shooting their guns on Christmas Day through the fucking streets, running in circles and whooping and hollering. Or, and this was a thing, using a piece of cardboard and a shoelace to make a bolo tie on the way to a fancy event because they decided to be a hobo. There were a lot of ridiculous choices that were made, but you came in and encouraged people to do heroin about it. Right. But that was the tone that was set by the players when you showed up, right? So with the, I will say my final piece of advice is do make sure that everybody has a backup character ready to go. Mm-hmm. We did it so that they had four characters ready to go. and you'd only bring one off of the train at a time. This was very, very useful for filling in because they were new players. They didn't know what skills they would need the best or in any given moment.
Yeah.
So having the ability to go back to the train and swap out a character. Hold on, I'll go get this guy. And then only that guy shows up. Did not break the narrative flow and allowed us to mitigate the danger, because the other thing that I kind of missed in this was it's very dangerous. This is a deadly, deadly, deadly campaign. Your characters will not make it out of book one.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be fucking shocking if they do. I was very, very lenient with all of you. And still, you went through characters. I think of the characters that were created, we went through 25% of them, and we got a quarter of the way through the game. So
yeah.
So anyway, that's it for this episode on Call of Cthulhu Horror on the Orient Express. If you've been inspired by any of the conversations in this episode, you can reach out to us through our subreddit r/itsAmimic, our Facebook group, or our Instagram. If you're one of the patrons, you can reach out to us on our Patreon-only Discord channel. If you'd like to support us, you can check the show notes below for links to our Patreon, as well as our website where you can donate or check out our store. And don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and leave positive reviews. Every little bit helps. Thank you for listening to Legend Lore from the It's a Mimic podcast. New releases will be aired on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, as well as dozens of other podcast apps, and previously published materials will be discussed on our Patreon. If you are interested in more tabletop role-playing game conversations, please browse the episode guide at www.itsamimic.com. Okay, one last question for you.
All right.
We've talked Spire, we've talked Cthulhu Tech, we've talked Call of Cthulhu. Have we done any others yet?
We talk book many things.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like unique campaigns.
Systems.
Yeah, systems. I think those are the only three, although we've dug into other stuff in the past.
Yeah.
Which one of those three is your favorite?
I have yet to play Spire.
Yeah.
I've yet to actually play it.
Well, you haven't played Cthulhu Tech either.
That's fair. I have played Call of Cthulhu. I've also played 5e.
You played Pathfinder First Edition?
Yeah. I don't know. I think right now I would be most out of those. I would be most excited about Spire. Cthulhu Tech. It was weird.
So fucking cool, but really weird. The details were rad.
Yeah,
but weird. Yeah, Spire was neat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I checked that out.
Honestly, the mechanics, like I've said in the previous 2 episodes, the mechanics of Call of Cthulhu draw me in. I fucking love the percentile dice, and they were simple enough that with the dense storyline, our basic like skills and checks and stuff in this campaign, I was never worried about running the mechanics of the system, even with the complicated chase and combat rules.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Call of Cthulhu has a special place in my heart, and I have no other defense for it other than that.
You need no other defense. No need to defend nothing, dude.
I feel like I went really hard on this episode and like on these fucking books, but I really liked playing. Like it was.
You went hard on it because there is so much potential, and there was so much potential that wasn't realized at the table.
God, you don't know. I would get on the phone with Miyake the next morning, and she'd say, "So how did Call of Cthulhu go last night?" And I go, "I am so fucking disheartened. I am so disappointed. We laughed. Sean did this funny thing. Dave did that funny thing. I murdered Terry for the 3rd fucking time. Like, there was a lot of cool shit. But we didn't do anything, and I was so disappointed. The mysteries were no closer to it."